Hey, folks, we're live. Tom Cagley and Jeremy Willets. I think we're the camp counselors for this, right, Tom?
Wait, I'm dressed like a camp counselor.
You are.
Yeah.
I was telling you before we hopped on. My camp counselor shirt is in the laundry, so I need to up my wardrobe game for the future ones of these. This is pretty workplace appropriate. I need to get a little louder with my wardrobe.
You know, either that or you need to put that zinc oxide stuff on your nose.
I was thinking about that. I don't have any of that either. I need to get some zinc oxide.
I don't have that either. Is that true? My daughter probably still has some left over from when her youngest was in diapers.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And that stuff lasts forever, right?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably be around after we have a nuclear war or something.
Yeah.
That and the cockroaches.
Sure. Earth will be great. Cockroaches and zinc oxide.
There you go.
Well,
hey, today we have our first session of our work intake summer camp.
We do, and this is pretty exciting. I think, as you and I were talking, it was probably a month ago or so now, right? We were talking about how to do something over the summer. We have obviously stuff happening, but we still want to get this material in front of people. And so we thought about this LinkedIn Live thing. We did one of them about a month ago where we talked about one of these particular challenges, one of the 8 primary causes of work intake problems.
You are so nice. Challenges.
It's HR speak maybe. But, as Tom and I were thinking, like, what if we do a series on this whole thing and we do it throughout the summer? We'll build it into your schedules. Hopefully folks can make some of them. Obviously, like attending all 8 of them is probably not something a lot of folks have the ability to do. But we thought this would be kind of a fun way to spend time with each other this summer, but also with people who are attending these to learn more and keep learning. Because let's face it, these are challenges that don't go away, right, Tom?
No, and they're challenges that pretty much everybody, if they step back and put aside the HR speak for a second, recognize that they have. I invited a number of people, and one gentleman who I've known for a while, so it's obvious that we can have that kind of conversation, said, well, I can't, we're closed today, but very frankly, this goal conflict stuff, this differences in goals that you're going to talk about in the first one, he said, I work in an academic organization, even though they're doing, they're programming and doing large products and projects. He said, this happens all the time. And so I hope you're taping this, and we'll do that too. But because it is part and parcel of what we're wrestling with.
It is a big deal, and it's this list is not necessarily prioritized, but the one we're going to cover today is a pretty big one, because at the end of the day, we all have goals, whether they're goals professionally or goals personally. And one of the really powerful things that organizations and companies can do is to get people aligned around goals, whether they're the classic sprint goal concept, or if you're a safe shop, maybe it's a PI objective, or if you're doing other sorts of goals. We'll talk about OKRs probably a little bit here when we talk about John Doerr in a few slides. Goals are incredibly valuable and can be incredibly useful, but they can also go wrong.
Well, let's talk about how can they go wrong. I have goals.
Me too. I have them tacked up here on my wall in my office, my longer term goals.
Excellent. So how can goals go wrong?
When we're talking about work intake and work coming to the team, the team specifically, they want to get things done in as orderly a manner as possible. And, when we talk about an orderly manner, if you think about some of the teams and companies and organizations that are developing products at scale, being able to get stuff done in an orderly manner gets infinitely more complex the more interactions you have to have outside of your own group of people. Think about the different communication paths that need to exist. Think about the potential different technical dependencies that exist when we start to work outside of our teams. So that ratchets up the complexity significantly. But the complexity also gets ratcheted up if someone else needs something from that team in order to do their piece, that's when things can get incredibly complex. So right there, you have maybe a great example of goal conflict right there. One team wants something from another team, but maybe it's not as high on that other team's priority list. Have you seen this, Tom?
Yes, and it really has. I think it is a common human problem. It isn't just, we're dealing with software. I'll go back to my first job right out of university. I was working in women's clothing, or at least I was in a women's clothing organization, and I was the sales statistician. And, we had a computer to, all help us with that. But, it boiled down to sometimes it was important to do forecasts about what we would sell. And that was important because we would then go out and cut the cloth and make it and do all that stuff. But if the numbers weren't exactly what the sales or the production folks wanted, they'd get really excited. It's like, Tom, you're forecasting that we're not going to make money this season. It's your fault. So my goal was to be accurate and precise and full of information. And their goal was not to get screamed at by the chairman of the board of the organization. Those two things conflicted. I'll tell you, it was a rude awakening in the corporate, for me, right out of school, bright and shiny, dark hair, that whole stuff. And, two different goals, and it ended up in a lot of conflict. I hid when I was doing forecasts.
I'll tell you a software example story. This is probably one that you've seen, Tom. It's maybe one that other teams and people have seen as well. I think it's a pretty classic example where a team is trying to develop new stuff, but they're also responsible for the old thing, right? And, that presents a huge conflict because you've got the desire and potentially a business need to go do this new thing, but then you've also got this other stuff coming at you, whether it's a customer is down, we need to make a particular enhancement to the software to win a new engagement with a customer. That's hard for people to sort out and rationalize in your brain. So it almost becomes like if you're a team member faced with that conundrum, you have to wonder how those people rationalize some of that conversation. And so, one of the reasons we instantiate roles like product owner is to help teams understand and work through some of those priorities. But at the end of the day, if you get an issue on your plate that's a customer down kind of thing, the natural human reaction to that is, oh my goodness, I'm going to prioritize that issue. No questions asked.
Absolutely. I've seen that exact one. I've actually worked in that exact one relatively recently. It's hard. You see people do horrible knee-jerk, and this is where the conflict causes not only trust issues and all sorts of other things, but it can cause organizations to do silly things in terms of organizational design, right? They'll have a product owner who is a product owner who focuses on the product and the functionality. And then they'll do something like have a technical product owner.
Oh yeah.
On the side, who's
two
worried about
too. That's another good one, right?
Oh, well, absolutely. And then planning becomes a mud wrestle, or worse. It's I know we decided to do this stuff in this sprint. We're doing sprints. Or I know that this is the priority, the list of priorities that we're taking into our Kanban board. But you know what? I do your review. And very frankly, I want this problem in the technology solved. And you know what? I'll tell the product owner, the functional product owner, that I decided that. You just go off and do that.
Yeah, all of this, Tom, I'm reflecting on the podcast you just released this past weekend. It was the Jim Benson replay from 2019, and Jim told a story about going to a client and trying to play the who has the most bosses game, and I think he found somebody that had 17 bosses, and I think you probably rattle off a scenario where somebody has at least half that many.
Absolutely. Yes, I did. And it's funny. In a previous career, I did a lot of work in productivity and team productivity, how much teams could actually get done, how you could, so that they weren't overloaded, so that they could fight to make sure that they weren't outsourced, because we all know that outsourcing is always more productive. But one of the factors, and I can show this mathematically, as the number of bosses goes up for any individual person or team, their productivity goes down. And it's sometimes not terribly linear. I mean, it can actually create a crash and burn kind of scenario. So this, whether you want to say, productivity doesn't count or not, all of this goal conflict stuff has an impact on morale, on trust, and on hardcore dollars and cents in terms of productivity.
Yeah, so let's talk about the impact on the people. It's like the last bullet point above the line, above the fold, if you will, on this particular slide. Acceptance is either overt or covert. And so it's like, if I'm a team member faced with that scenario where I have 8, 10, 17 bosses, what do I do? Do I spend my entire day sort of beating the proverbial bushes looking for what to actually work on? Or do I just decide that maybe I like Bob better one day, so I'll listen to that boss on a given day, and then listen to a different boss on a given day? Or maybe I just kind of throw my hands up and go, I'm just going to come to work and do whatever.
All of those scenarios are rational.
And who can blame you for that? Who can blame you for that? I mean, when faced with a goal conflict that massive, what is a person supposed to do?
We actually have a term for that. That's called the squeaky wheel, right?
Yes.
Who's yelling at you the loudest today? That's what I'm going to deal with today.
Yep.
And I'll just tell them that I've started, go back to that Nyquist video where he showed, the building of the happy faces. I mean, I started on your stuff. People don't necessarily say, but are you continuing to work on it? I can say I started it. And then tomorrow when somebody yells at it, I'll put it down. I'll pick up something else. Nobody is going to end up happy.
Yeah. Because it started at the end of the day. You've appeased one of the conflicts by saying that you've started on something, but really, I mean, the goal is to have it done, but no, I've started on it, so I've made one of my bosses happy.
Do you think that goal conflict is something that is generated by people as a rule, or is it because of the way we organize and engineer companies?
Is it a lame answer to say both?
It depends.
I didn't want to go down the consultant route, but it really could be. It depends, I think, on. I think the type of person matters quite a bit. I'll use another Jim Benson phrase that has stuck with me for a long time. I forget whether it's in one of his books or he said it in a keynote that I heard him. We work in companies to be kept company. It's like that's like a very human thing. Like we work in these big organizations because we know, whether literally or conceptually, that to get big important things done in the world, we have to work with other people to do that. And so I think some of us are wired to make that experience such that we try and get alignment across different goals. We enjoy having goals, but then I think, there are people that work in companies that are maybe not as interested in doing that. Maybe they're more concerned about either moving up the org stack somehow, or just coming to work and collecting a paycheck. So I think that could be part of it. At a company level, undoubtedly there are roles. I think, skipping down to one of the questions below, undoubtedly we have roles in corporate America and probably the world that incentivize differently based on way of thinking. So certainly, like, short-term incentivization can lead to a lot of bad behavior. I think you've seen that. I've seen that in my time, whether it's bad behavior on behalf of salespeople, C-level executives, technical people. That's definitely something that's built into how an enterprise operates. That was there and probably instantiated in the culture long before the people inhabiting those roles got there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think those questions that we suggest are a mechanism for identifying goal conflict. They, I think, maybe sort of show us the path in some cases to remediation, but I don't think it's absolutely direct. But at first, it's like anything else. First, you have to recognize that you have a problem, and these questions we've tried before. We practice it not only in our individual practices, but we used it on ourselves while we were writing the book.
Yeah. And there are some really deep, you'll note that, like, we don't ask directly in any of these questions about goals. It's like, we're asking about things like conflict, things like trust, things like what happens when disagreements happen. So we're not overtly asking, like, hey, Tom, what are your goals for this particular job? We're trying to probe a little bit deeper and get a little bit deeper into what might be the motivation for some of the things that you are overtly practicing.
I'm currently reading the book, Flow.
Yeah.
And also at the same time reading 4,000 Weeks. Arguably, I do think it's important that you have, as a team, as a team of teams, as a department, that you do directly have that conversation about what your goals are and that they're explicit. Because if they aren't explicit, then I think it's difficult to get accepted. Hopefully, it certainly won't be overt. It may be more covert, and it'd probably be easier just to make up your own goals at that point, if it isn't out in the public and out in the ordinary.
Yeah, and what you just said is a great transition and segue to the next slide, the John Doerr quote, because the picture you painted was like the inverse of this quote. The picture you painted was, let's come up with a goal, let's make it crisp, and let's align to it and go after it. And so, the John Doerr quote, when people have conflicting priorities or unclear, meaningless, or arbitrarily shifting goals, they become frustrated, cynical, and demoralized. And so this is from, one of the seminal figures in Silicon Valley for the last 30 years, maybe more. The guy who wrote Measure What Matters, which is a book on OKRs and how to craft OKRs. It deals with OKRs not only in corporate America, but in OKRs and goal craftsmanship, outside of corporate America. I think in the book he talks about Bono and some of the work that the U2 vocalist has done towards AIDS relief. I think that's one of the particular case studies he goes after when talking about goals outside of corporate America and the impact that OKR has had on the way that particular organization, RED is the name, I think, that the way that particular organization has used OKRs to make traction on a global initiative that is in no way, shape, or form tied to some sort of company. It's a humanistic initiative.
I think at some point, perhaps in another LinkedIn Live, we can talk about the collision, perhaps the goal conflict between management by objectives and OKRs.
Yeah. How about Peter Drucker? How about we talk about him a little bit?
Peter Drucker, I think I probably have half a dozen Peter Drucker books floating around this office somewhere. Another seminal figure in terms of American management. There is no perfect strategic decision. One always has to pay a price. One always has to balance conflicting objectives, conflicting opinions, and conflicting priorities. That's why I would suggest that having this goals discussion out in public out so that it can be transparent is hugely possible, so that you can then, at least even when you do still have those conflicts, because I don't think you can homogenize people 100%. Even when you have those, what you can do is at least knock off the edges so that you understand how people will behave.
Yeah, because I'm a firm believer, and I think you are too, that goals can be useful. Goals can be very important, whether they're smaller, kind of team level, maybe a sprint goal kind of concept, or bigger, wider goals that span quarters or years. They are very valuable to keep people engaged, to keep people aligned, to keep people going after something that's going to be good for them, but also the enterprise.
What if a goal is impossible?
It's a good question. There's a lot. There's some quote about having dreams being okay, but if you don't have specific, like, tangible ways to get there, then it's just a dream. I think the scenario you're setting up is like, if we put this, maybe it's a North Star goal, if you will, but this goal that we're going after that we're never going to quite achieve. There's got to be really good messaging around that. I think there's got to be some messaging that either is really optimistic, in so much as that you think as an enterprise or a team you can eventually achieve this, and here's what you need to do to go after it. Otherwise, you risk huge pessimism. No.
Yeah, I think things that are impossible, not it's a stretch, not that you can learn, you can get into a state of flow and build toward it, but it's simply impossible. All that, I think that brings us back to that demoralization statement.
Yeah, I would agree.
Before. So how do we break the cycle?
You said number one already. It's like and folks, you can use those questions that we provided a few slides ago. You got to go out and observe. You got to go out and ask people. And you've got to do it sort of in a detective is maybe the wrong word, but you've got to go out and sort of collect data, collect observations. You're probably not going to be able to just go up to people and ask them what their goals are at work. That's probably not a great start to a conversation. You're going to have to talk to them and understand.
Well, if you ask directly, what happens? People will tell you what they think you want them to hear.
Yes.
They not because they're trying to hide something. It's because they're trying to be good people. They're trying to be good corporate citizens.
Right.
Unless they're not being good people, and then they're going to lie to you anyway, right?
That's very fair. So, like, how do we get around that? So there's the shared goal concept. We've hit on this before. Whether you're using OKRs, sprint goals, management by objective, whatever framework standards you're using, the idea of sharing goals is so incredibly powerful. So I'll tell you a brief story, and this is something that's relevant to me in my current work, but has also been relevant to me in my past work. And it's the whole concept of annual performance goals. Like, we have annual performance goals, right? And say what you want about an annual performance review cycle. That's maybe a separate conversation. But where I'm going with this is, in modern work, particularly knowledge work, we've decided to put people on these things called teams. And we say, okay, teams, go do this stuff. But the performance review cycle, by and large, is still individualized. So, one of the needles that I've tried to thread in my past, and even in my present a little bit, is, we should all be kind of going after the same thing. So why don't we share some of these goals? Whether it's a team of developers sharing a set of goals, a team of coaches sharing a set of goals. If we're all supposed to be moving in this direction, why are we evaluating people separately? Why aren't we all moving together towards the same thing, sharing the same thing, and being evaluated using a similar set of data?
Hard to argue with. The third one is maximize visibility. It is, having people know what your goals are, so that if you're being incented for something like sales and I'm being incented for delivering functionality, that we know that. Or if I'm being incented for stability and you're being incented for creating as many new functions as possible, same application, we understand the motivation that each one of us is going to have, and the inbuilt conflicts that will actually occur there.
Yeah. Measurement, I know a topic that's, near and dear to Tom's heart as a host of a podcast that includes the word, measurement in the title. Over 800 episodes strong. It's a thing that's near and dear to you. But yeah, you got to figure out a way to measure some of these goals. They can't just all be soft. It's you want to drift back to the SMART acronym that describes good goal writing. That can be useful. Specific, measurable is that second part of that SMART goal acronym. It's important.
Yeah. And they have to be real things.
Yep.
And then finally, retrospect. The whole idea of feedback, stepping back, whether it's individually and looking at what's happening, stepping back as a team, stepping back as a larger group, and thinking about what's happened, observing, taking those observations and those experiences, and crafting a better way, right? So people in microcosm can work together and be very smart.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to have more of these summer camps, right? This is one, right? I think we've defined the problem. We've given you some campfire stories around them. And they weren't too scary.
No.
We could shine the flashlight underneath and, create the ghoul face. We've talked about some ways of recognizing that. There's some extra questions. We've, provided some approaches to actually dealing with that. And obviously we'd love to hear from you about how you've seen and dealt with that. But we're going to do this 7 more times. And the next one is when, Jeremy?
The next one is next Wednesday, Tom. So June 26th is the next one. We'll be doing, I think it's the same exact time. So whatever time you're watching this, if you're watching from the Eastern Standard Time Zone, it's 11:30 a.m. We'll hop on. Hopefully I'll have a more festive shirt in my wardrobe by that point. Tom may or may not have zinc oxide smeared all over himself, and we'll get to it. We'll hop through our next one.
All right. The next one is when needs outstrip demand. And if you don't work in a place where needs outstrip demand, then I think you're probably going out of business. So I think that is one of those things that's common, and it causes all sorts of work intake sorts of issues.
Yeah, this was excellent. So thank you so much, folks, for making time out of your Juneteenth holiday to join us for our walk through goal conflict. A reminder, we've got a book out. It's sitting back here in the corner. You probably can see it. Mastering Work Intake. We put it out in January on JRoss Press. It's available from all the normal places. We've also got a Maven.com workshop coming up. So I believe it starts in mid-July. We're taking a little bit of a different tact with this one. We got some feedback after our first workshop that maybe we could offer a different offering whereby we include a little bit more video-based content so folks can consume that on their own before hopping into the interactive sessions that we'll still host. So the workshop we're starting off in the middle of July is going to include more of a video-based approach, but there will still be plenty of opportunity to interact directly with Tom and myself.
And your other cohort members, which, the first couple that we did, the interaction between the cohort members was probably richer than even the interaction between us. I got a ton out of that. Again, thank you for spending 30 minutes with us this afternoon or this morning or in the middle of the night or whenever you watch this. We enjoyed it. We look forward to the next 7 sessions.